I know I did something that was probably a little impulsive. Please don't follow my impulsivity and don't look at the sheets just yet, at least in terms of the text. I'll introduce what we're studying in a second, but I do want to focus on the first couple questions that were on there, and that's why things got passed out when they did. So today, one of the topics we're going to be talking about is leadership, and I want to start off with a brief conversation about what you think makes a strong leader. What actions, what traits, what characteristics. So I'm opening the question to the floor on this. Yeah. Empathy. Okay. Confidence.
Decisiveness.
Decisiveness, being able to admit they're wrong. I think that yeah. Problem solving. Other thoughts? I think that setting an example. Creative, charismatic. I think that makes a pretty good leader. Great overall list. And let's change the thought process for a second here. How does that change, or does it change if you're talking about a religious leader? I'm seeing a no from Sandra.
Cultural literacy in whatever the religion is.
Okay, so cultural literacy, that would be an important potential addition, although I might say that even from a non-religious leader, and we didn't bring it up, there's probably an expectation of that. Other thoughts?
If you're going to be a religious leader, you probably need to be able to try to encourage people to think beyond their own. I like to kind of focus on that zone, get into the supernatural, external, into
So to think of their leadership as being not just of a connections here on earth, but on a greater level. I'm hearing to a certain extent, maybe even connections with God. We don't need to be afraid to use that word in this building. Yeah.
I often think about what's the difference between a law and a wrath, right? There's some people who kind of dial it in, not anyone we know, but then there are some people who need to call. And I think a religious leader, it's very important to not just be a job, but be a call. How to say that in terms of what their characteristics are, but kind of a commitment to life.
Great. So Sandra's saying not just seeing it as a task at hand or a job, but seeing it as a calling. And we'll see some of that in the text we're going to be looking at. Great. So let me preface the text now that we're going to be getting into. So there is a course of study known as 929, which is studying every chapter of Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, from literally the beginning through to the end, a chapter a day. And in the upcoming week, one of the chapters that's coming up, chapter 6 of Shoftim, of Judges, it looks at one leader among many that we've had in our past, and his origin story, that leader being Gideon. And I want to take a look at the text and see why it may be that those before us look to Gideon as a leader, and whether or not in a modern sensibility he rises, or at least the way that we're looking at leadership, he rises to the task or not. So can I get a volunteer to actually, for the sake of Zoom and whatnot, I'll go ahead and read, and then we'll address some questions. Let me just break it up a little bit here, because you'll see that I'm starting at verse 15. That's in part for brevity, but the first 14 or so verses are the Israelites. This is all happening after the story of Deborah and Barak and Sisera, and we have a great leader, and then leaders don't last forever, and there's a void of leadership, the people rebel, and the Israelites lose their sovereignty. And so that's like the first 10-ish verses. And then the next couple verses are God calling out to Gideon and saying, you're going to be the next leader of Israel. And so Gideon responds back. Gideon, said to him, please, my Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Why, my clan is the humblest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's household. The Lord replied, I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian to a man. And he said to him, if I have gained your favor, give me a sign that it is you who are speaking to me. Do not leave this place until I come back to you and bring out my offering and place it before you. And he answered, I will stay until you return. And then the next little bit is Gideon going into his household and preparing this offering. And then we pick up with verse 21. The angel of the Lord held out the staff that he carried and touched the meat and the unleavened bread with its tip. Those are the two things that Gideon brings out as an offering. A fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. Then Gideon realized that it was an angel of the Lord, and Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, all is well, have no fear, you shall not die. So Gideon built there an altar to the Lord and called it Adonai Shalom. To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. So this is our first look as Gideon as a leader to a certain extent. He's not leading anyone in particular, but it's our first look into Gideon's relationship with God. Does this look like a leader to you? He looks like Moshe. Can you say more on that?
He has the humility of Moshe. He says one year should be the youngest and this kind of that. Maybe humility is something that he's a good leader. Not all leaders, but a good leader perhaps.
Great. So Sandra's saying that he has the humility of that, a humility that calls back to Moshe. And that's certainly something in our tradition. We look up to Moshe. So that would be, and that's one of Moshe's key leadership traits or character traits that come out in Moshe's leadership. That should be something that we also look up to in a good leader that isn't just Moshe. Other thoughts? How do you feel about the asking God for multiple signs that this is supposed to be the next leader?
Still consistent with what you were saying about Moshe, right? He's not sure that he's really the one specifically, so I'm sure you would want to do that. Hesitancy.
So, okay. So the asking for signs is once again a callback kind of to Moshe that we should also potentially be looking up to.
Also call back to so many characters and this 2 weeks of blending together. I think 2 weeks ago at this point, where Abraham sent his servant to find Rebecca, and he said, give me a sign that this is the right person. So it's a consistent theme that we need signs and reassurance from God from
So this is not just a callback to Moshe, it's also a callback to the servant that Avram sends out to go look for a wife for his son. And that was also a successful journey on behalf of a Jewish figure. So too, a Jewish leader. So that shouldn't be, so you're saying that shouldn't be a sign that we maybe think twice about looking to Gideon as a leader. Okay. Yeah.
Maybe slightly off topic, but I think that he's genuinely surprised that this person is genuinely suspicious and genuinely surprised that this person he's talked to is divine. And so he's reluctant at first, but he's also kind of willing, and like once the reveal happens, then he's afraid because like he just stuffed something divine, which is dangerous. But like he's building an altar and he's offering, and before that he's gonna bring sacrifice, right? In the verses that we've passed. So like he's sort of playing the role the way he's supposed to, I guess. But
so if I understand what you're saying correctly, Stevie, the fact we have the reluctance, that's one thing that we've already discussed, but the surprise at what this encounter with an angel looks like is not something to be completely upset about either, because everyone else before him has also done that. Like it is a scary thing to come face to face with a messenger of God, be it God himself, God's self, or
in the initial conversation, he doesn't realize.
right. So the fact that the initial conversation, the angel doesn't come out and say, I'm an angel, we shouldn't be shocked then that at the end of the conversation where this big reveal happens, that there's some sort of shock, surprise, something like that. Yeah. Oh, okay.
That also is preface or whatever by Abraham has been, right? We've got Rocco has like this is a theme, coming in contact with someone you think is a man that turns out to be, this is happening repeatedly with all these.
Great. 1 sec. I just want to restate, and then yeah. So what was stated was that this is also this idea of surprise at encounters with celestial beings is also something that is a trope through the Torah that we see, or through Tanakh that we see again and again and again, and so that shouldn't necessarily take us aback either. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you place Gideon, kind of in the order of who he is?
Yeah, so thank you. I'm not sure that I'm going to get everyone right, but so end of Torah is Moshe, is our leader. Then we go into the book of Joshua, and that's Joshua. We're 6 chapters into Shoftim, and I want to say we've had like 3 different Shoftim up to this point. I'm not 100% sure I'm getting that number right, but we haven't had that many.
It's the first one that they try to make thing. The first one that they try to make.
Yeah, that's going to happen in later chapters, but we're
He's before Joseph, right?
no, long after Joseph. Yeah, so we're out of Torah at this point.
That's my first book, so that's cool. The second one is he basically is tearing down the altar his father put up, and his father is basically I'm looking at Judges 6, the next last page. Am I ahead of myself?
Yeah, you're ahead of us.
Okay, so I'll keep quiet.
But we'll get there. We will. Okay, looking forward to it. So I want to phrase this now all in, or I want to put this into perspective a little bit and just ask you for a second. You're having a conversation with someone on the street, and they've come up to you and told you something that could be viewed as a little bit outrageous, and 5 seconds later they vanish and you realize they're an angel. How do you react to that?
I totally get that.
You've totally had that happen.
So, but I've had something. No, downtown LA, but working with the giving spirit, we had a situation, and I'm not saying this person was an angel, but this person to whom we were giving things that they needed to live on the street. That's to prophesy about being the angel, me and my son, and kind of held himself out to be an angel. And so Daniel and I had a conversation about what does an angel in modern day look like? Right? What does a prophet of God look like? Of course, we would say someone who hooks himself out to be a prophet in today's age has a mental health issue. That's what we would say. But what if this person really was a prophet? How would we know that? I suppose if we had vanished into thin air, that maybe that would have been a clue.
Great. Yeah.
I don't think we have the tools today to recognize a prophet or an angel.
So story was told about, if I understand correctly, this was an encounter that was happening with someone who was professing to prophecy, which today we probably would be more likely to we would be more likely to assume that it was some sort of a mental health issue than it was actually speaking on behalf of God. And so it leads to a conversation. How do we today interact with, how would we interact with people who are professing to prophecy or potentially angels, at least as our tradition has written them into our holiest books? And I don't know what the answer is for myself. I would imagine for myself that if I was in Gideon's shoes here, I would be happy if I came out looking like he did. I would probably be a lot more scared, and would probably be a lot more afraid that I had offended God. And at the same point, I would also probably be asking for more than just a couple of signs that God had chosen me to do anything, even if it was a small, minute task. And we'll see in a second that this is no small task that Gideon is called to. We have a history of not really listening to our leaders. We have a history of having to overcome very difficult foreign rule. And these are all things that are going to be on Gideon's plate from day one. Great.
How would you say the miracle of Israel today,
We're,
2,000 years? I think, what greater miracle do we need to see? You know?
but we're talking angels here. So let's move on in the text for a second here, and we'll delve into this a little bit more about what his first task as a leader is going to look like. He's been chosen. He's been a little bit afraid about it, but he's going to go ahead and at least do something that can be called an act of leadership. So that night the Lord said to him, "Take the young bull belonging to your father and another bull 7 years old. Pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the sacred post which is beside it. Then build an altar to the Lord your God on the level ground, on top of this stronghold. Take the other bull and offer it as a burnt offering, using the wood of the sacred post that you have cut down." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But he was afraid to do it by day on account of his father's household and the townspeople. He did it by night. Early the next morning, the townspeople found that the altar of Baal had been torn down and the sacred post beside it had been cut down, and that the second bull had been offered on the newly built altar. They said to one another, "Who did this thing?" Upon inquiry and investigation, they were told, "Gideon, son of Joash, did this thing." The townspeople said to Joash, "Bring out your son, for he must die. He has torn down the altar of Baal and cut down the sacred post beside it." But Joash said to all who had risen against him, "Do you have to contend for Baal? Do you have to vindicate him? Whoever fights his battle shall be dead by the morning. If he is a god, let him fight his own battles, since it is his altar that has been torn down." That day they named him Yerubbaal, meaning let Baal contend with him, since he tore down his altar. So my first question, I'm actually going to proceed for a second here and say, who in this text do you think has acts of leadership? Joash steps up. Yeah.
I mean, that was the point I was going to raise earlier. I mean, but the altar was your chef. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there, your chef decided that look at sentence 2. Pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father. Father's your chef.
Joash.
Even though.
Yoash. Yeah, that's, I mean, it's his altar.
Right.
The townspeople are saying, wait a minute, let's kill your son because the altar got turned down, and then Yoash decides to be the leader, because it was his altar was turned down, versus Abraham, who knocked down his father's altars and then said, let them kill themselves. So Abraham was a leader. Yoash is a leader. I don't know if Gideon did more than he followed God against his father. That was, I guess, his leadership role, you know. But there's nowhere in there where the father decided to switch from having the altar to defending his son who tore down the altar. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Confusing me.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Sometimes does, I guess you guys too.
Yeah. So we have Yoash definitely shows, if I'm understanding what we were just discussing here, Yoash definitely shows an act of leadership by standing up to the townspeople. And there's also some uncertainty about how he even comes around to this point, because this was his altar in the first place that his son tore down. Gideon maybe shows some leadership by listening to God. And the townspeople, there are other character here, probably not, I'm guessing. Other thoughts? So
I kind of want the cultural context, the background, who's following God, who's not, Gideon became his father and his father's household is involved in law, how he became the command of Hashem. Like I want the background story.
yeah. So, and that's on me because I was trying to cut down for time, and I don't know that I needed to cut down for time quite as much as I did. Yeah, so those first couple, the call from literally comes from God, and it kind of comes out of the blue, other than the fact that we've been set up for this power vacuum in which the people are engaging in idolatry, and they don't have a clear leader, and the Midianites have taken over, and that's the background. All of a sudden, we get a call. Gideon gets the call from God, and that's not exactly a call that you can't answer. And that brings it, and that's sort of where we were picking up from. There's not a lot of context to any previous actions that Gideon has done. His first actions that we're seeing are right here. In terms of the people and like the cultural context, the Midianites are an idolatrous group, and they've taken over, and that's just the religion of the land at this point. Yeah, you can call it that. You can call it any number of other things, but it's back in ancient times, religion was tied to the government to a certain extent. And so when one government or one ruling power moved in, the gods of that ruling power moved in with them, and everyone kind of got behind that. We were one of the few peoples that had a religion without power. And so that's the dynamic that's playing out through all the book of Shoftim and beyond, is how do you act as a people? And it's a very modern conversation that we could have at another point as well. How do you act as a people that doesn't necessarily have the dominant culture and religion when you still have your own culture and religion? It's a bit of both assimilation by osmosis and assimilation by the sword. There's certainly a sense of this is what you do or else. But there's also just generally back in the day a sense of when one ruling power overcame another ruling power, it was viewed as a sign that one ruling power's God had overcome the other ruling power's God or gods or pantheon. And so it was viewed as a religious sign when that happened. And it's not something that we don't see in our text either. There's certainly a sense that when the Jewish people turn away from God, then God turns away from the Jewish people, and those people, the Jewish people, lose sovereignty. The Israelites, that's a story that also plays out in Shoftim a lot, is this loss of faithfulness to God, and as a result, a loss of political power. Yeah.
There's also a loose, in my head, there's a loose connection here going back to Judah and Tamar, where Tamar brings to Judah the right thing to do, and Judah realizes that she is in the right, and that the rules of God are giving Judah progeny that continue on. So that, it's kind of a very different story, but it's the next generation reinforming the older generation. Hey, get back on track here, right? And the next that generation is separate. So that's kind of a parallel.
Great. That was nowhere on my mind, and I love that connection. This idea of Judah and Tamar, and of Tamar reminding Judah what it actually means to be in line with the rules of the civilization of Israelite religion, Jewish peoplehood, etc. And so there's, once again, here we have the younger generation reminding the older generation, here's what we actually need to be doing. You've got to come back around to what you had told us was important. Great. How would you, so I'm curious how you guys feel about Gideon getting a new name that has a foreign god in it too. That's now going to be, this is someone who is known as someone who let Baal contend with him, but Baal is a foreign god. This is a Jewish, this would be a modern, I'm not going to go there, but but like you can imagine what it would be like today if we had someone who was the chief rabbi of Israel, let's say, even with the name of another religion in it. Thoughts?
It's kind of making fun of Paul, it's like saying, they're naming him after a defeated.
So it's a reminder of defeat. It's a reminder.
It's kind of like a victory celebration. We won.
It's a victory celebration. Okay.
That's what I was saying.
All right.
In defense of
Yeah.
and the rationalization.
It's also disrespectful, the religion, the Baal's religion, and people following Baal to the point of, in more than another way. Could you imagine, I mean, there would be a fatwa, it was Allah, right? It was like, it could be I'm using the word, but it's really kind of slipping the net flat for that religion. And so it's almost inviting conflict.
So it's an invitation to conflict, and is that something that we want in a religious leader then?
So the thing that
Yeah, there's a lot of pronouns here, which does not make things difficult, but or which does make things difficult.
Gideon became known as Jerubbaal.
Yeah.
For his father.
Right, that's what I'm trying to find out. Is it Gideon is now called Jerubbaal, or is God called Jerubbaal? Do we know as it goes forward in the text?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think the text further on brings that name up again. It's kind of a nickname. And it even says they named him that. He's not going around, whoever that he is not going around calling himself.
He's not calling himself that.
Right.
Right.
Okay. We can, there's certainly some
Nothing like that biblical ambiguity.
yes, there's certainly some biblical ambiguity, and there's nothing quite like it. So I want to wrap up by just looking at this overall story. The chapter ends with Gideon asking for yet another sign from God that he is the chosen one, and Gideon gets the sign, and that's where our chapter ends. So we've done a chapter in 929 that's coming up this week. My question for you is, and Gideon's story will go on beyond this, but from his origin at least, How would you feel if this was your leader? We've got one, I'd take the father over Gideon, another, but the father was a Baal worshiper. Other thoughts? This side of the room has been very quiet. Thoughts? Let me rephrase it in a different way then, because this is something that people tend to be very contentious about. Let's say Beth Am is looking for another rabbi. Is Gideon the person you want to be that rabbi? No. That was a very quick no. Can you say more about why no?
I don't know enough about where he really came from. So far, he's very tentative, and so far, other than very explicit direction from God, he's not really able. I don't get a sense that he's synthesizing. I think he's somebody who's going to execute the rules, but he's not necessarily able to make judgments on his own. We don't know that. I think to be a respected leader at the level of the rabbi, you also need to be able to think on your own based on context.
Great. One second, just so I can. So one point of view on this was that if Gideon was up for a pulpit here at Beth Am, the answer would be no, because there's just partially because there's not enough information, but also partially because he's very tentative and he's only doing what God's telling him. There's no synthesis. There's just a sense of, I'm told to do this by God, so I do it. And there's not any real thought that's going into the actions that are playing out. Go ahead.
So I will take the opposing view. I will say that the most important quality for a law is humility. And Gideon has that in his faith. And the reason that is so important is that you're coming into a congregation of human beings. And you're going to be leading these people, and you have to be there for those people also. And it takes a great deal of humility to not put your sense of leadership over that. And I think that effective rabbis tend to have
Great. So the opposing point would say the hesitance isn't hesitance, it's humility. And that is a very effective quality in a rabbi if we're going to talk about that idea of a Jewish leader.
I would just add to that, Gideon's a revolutionary. He went against all of society with humility, but with fervor, with intent. And that's not easy to do. He did what he was supposed to do, what he was supposed to do, and with humility, but against all of society. The revolutionary.
Great. So Gideon is a revolutionary. He's going up against all of society on his own. And if there's a little bit of hesitance, let him have it. There's nothing wrong with that as long as the outcome is what's supposed to happen. Is that a good rephrasing of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, he sees into the future. He sees that this is the direction that the Israelites are going is not correct. He's not lording over them with any kind of pretext. He's just saying he took 10 of the people and overdid the status quo. He took the Israelites in a new direction.
Great.
And that's a leader.
Yeah.
I would venture to say, to add on to that, that perhaps he was also a creative problem solver. It seems like he's hiding it first by tearing down Baal's altar, putting up an altar to Hashem at night. But also, on the other hand, we see as avoiding direct conflict, as doing something. If he had done it during broad daylight, the war might have broken out right away. Instead, it bought him time and it shows the potential to think a little bit outside of the box and to kind of look down the road and try to do something in a way that will have the least amount of negative.
Great. So one other way of looking at what happens here at night is that it's actually an attempt to avoid conflict while still doing the right thing. And in that sense, he's actually problem solving. He's not necessarily being hesitant. I'm gonna. So I want to wrap up here, but I think that we can sit with both of these ideas of Gideon and say that there's a certain sense that he's not the perfect leader. There's also a certain sense that he does show some leadership qualities, hence why he's one of our Shov team. And part of that, I think, just comes out of different leadership needs for different times. Certain qualities will be more necessary to lead us certain people in certain times than they will be in other times or with different groups of people. And so my blessing for this community is that as we're looking at the 50th anniversary of the Library Minyan and so many more wonderful things to celebrate, including having the USCG board here next week, that all these leaders who bless us with the right qualities at the right time.